I think it's a kind of national convulsion when a country's government simply shuts down. Yet that's exactly what the United States is enduring right now. More than a month of frozen institutions and a crisis far beyond the partisan theater. This video will explain what's really at stake when a shutdown drags on, how it morphs from a political standoff into an economic drag, how ordinary people rather than Washington insiders bear the damage, and why the recovery may not simply be a reversal of lost time. We'll take 3 chapters, as usual: how the shutdown evolved into something far more serious than usual, the tangible consequences for people and businesses, and why the long-term risks now are far more acute than in past episodes. If you're new here, this channel looks at how trade, policy, and power shifts in real time, and how those shifts affect ordinary people. If that resonates with you, feel free to subscribe. I would love to have you here. And before we begin, I want to briefly mention something that speaks directly to the story we're about to unpack. I've just released Awake, a book about how to think clearly when the noise is constant and consequences unfold slowly. It's meant for moments like this one, when political disruption looks temporary on the surface, but reveals deeper structural risk underneath. If you've ever felt that your ability to think independently is your most important asset, Awake was written with that in mind. It's available now with a 10% launch discount for the next 3 days. You'll find the book in the launch video link below if you'd like to explore further. Now let's turn to the United States and the real cost of a shutdown that shows no sign of ending. You know, I find it telling and honestly a little absurd that this shutdown didn't begin with a clash over budget items or ideological differences about government spending, but it began as a political standoff, pure theater. No detailed proposals, no serious talks about trade-offs, just brinkmanship. And yet somehow from that shallow origin, it's grown into something far more serious now. This is not just a delay in paperwork anymore or a pause in public services. It's weeks, 5 whole weeks so far, of suspended federal operations, weeks of missed paychecks, weeks of hollowed out institutions running on skeleton crews. This isn't just dysfunction at this point, it is decay. In the past, government shutdowns in the US have typically carried a kind of implied promise. Yes, it will hurt, but it's going to pass quickly. In 2019, the United States experienced its longest shutdown to date, lasting 35 days. It cost the economy an estimated $11 billion, and $3 billion of that was never recovered. That was already alarming. But in my view, what makes this one more dangerous and frankly more reckless is that it's colliding with a very different economic backdrop. First, there's the underlying fragility. Inflation is still high, far above target. Job growth has softened. Household debt is rising. And consumer sentiment, especially among lower income Americans, is deteriorating rapidly. This is not an economy that can absorb shock casually. Second, there's the institutional erosion. Confidence in Washington's ability to perform basic governance is rapidly declining. When tens of millions of people watch their government repeatedly break down, it does something corrosive. Trust is not just emotional, it's economic. When businesses can't rely on stable contracts, when families can't rely on predictable support, they pull back, and that retreat has a cost. Third, the damage this time may not be easily reversible like it was last time. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that if this shutdown stretches past Thanksgiving, the US could lose 7 to 14 billion in economic output, potentially more when you factor in second-order effects too. And that's just the measurable part. What about the family that misses rent because a federal worker didn't get paid on time? Or the small business that delays hiring because their SBA loan got stuck in a limbo? Those are not numbers, my friends, they are lives. And in my view, it is deeply irresponsible, morally and economically, to treat those impacts as collateral damage in a political game. The point is this: shutdowns used to be costly but containable. You take a hit, you pay the back wages, the economy bounces back more or less. But I think that era might be over. This is not a hiccup in operations anymore. It's a wound. And if it keeps happening or lasts much longer, it becomes a structural risk, not just to growth, but to legitimacy. That to me is the real danger, not the missed paperwork or the late salaries, although that as well, but the normalization of collapse. Now, if I may zoom in, what does this look like on the ground? Because yes, federal workers are very visible, but in using the vantage point of people outside the US, I'm particularly mindful of how deeply ordinary lives get affected when the gears of government grind. For example, the CBO indicates that hundreds of thousands of federal employees could still be furloughed or working without pay. That's one level. But then the next level, private contractors reliant on government purchases are seeing frozen contracts. As I read, over $24 billion in federal goods and services spending is reportedly frozen. In my view, that means businesses in the private sector start feeling the pinch as well. Small businesses are definitely suffering. The US Small Business Administration has been unable to issue new loans. Thousands of firms missing out on billions in financing. These are the restaurants, the local manufacturers, the mom and pop shops, the service providers who are directly connected to everyday livelihoods. The narrative to me is clear. The shock is becoming diffuse, broadening across society. Then there are the most vulnerable, where it pains me the most. Programs like Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, that's the food stamps, that feeds tens of millions of Americans. We're talking 42 million, by the way, as if that's an okay number. Delays or cuts here mean less food, bigger stress at home, literally lack of survival. The shutdown of the Head Start program, early childhood education for low-income families, means that some parents can't go to work because their childcare support is gone. And another striking image, air traffic controllers working without pay, airports reporting delays, critical systems showing signs of unraveling. For me, this all signals that the damage is no longer theoretical. It's moments like this, quiet bureaucratic failures that spiral into real-life hardship that remind me why clarity matters, why we need frameworks for thinking, not just reactions to headlines. That's why I wrote Awake. It's for exactly this kind of crisis. Subtle at first, structural in impact. If you're trying to stay grounded when the signals are messy and the stakes are rising, I think you'll find it useful. There is a launch discount for just a few more days and the link is below. But now let's talk about why the recovery this time might not just be slow, but incomplete. Now, in my view, this is the part we should be paying the most attention to because this is where the shutdown becomes more than a temporary disruption. This is where it threatens to embed itself in the long-term economic story of the United States and Canada as well by proxy. Yes, shutdowns have always been disruptive, but in the past, they've been recoverable. Painful, sure, but short-lived. A sharp dip followed by a rebound. Government workers received back pay, contracts resumed, confidence returned eventually. But I don't think that's where we're heading anymore. Because the economic landscape now is fundamentally more fragile, inflation remains a persistent headwind, quietly eroding purchasing power and complicating monetary policy a lot. Job growth is slowing and confidence both among business and households is weakening. This isn't a soft patch, it's a soft floor. So when you throw a prolonged shutdown into the mix, there is very little cushioning left. The Congressional Budget Office, along with private analysts as well, now warns that some losses from the shutdown won't be temporary, they will be permanent. In the 2018-19 case, about $3 billion in output was lost and never regained. This is not an estimate, that's a historical record. And this time the CBO estimates a potential 1 to 2% point hit to quarterly GDP growth if the shutdown bleeds into the next quarter. This is insane. What that means in simple terms is this: the longer this drags on, the harder the rebound becomes because the baseline keeps shrinking down. And it's not just about what gets lost in the moment, it's what gets deferred. Long-term investment, hiring decisions, infrastructure projects, credit approvals. When public sector uncertainty collides with already tentative private sector momentum, the result is paralysis. And in my view, that's the silent killer of economic recovery. Not necessarily the shouting in Congress or the headlines or whatever is posted on Truth Social that day, but the quiet hesitation in a bank loan meeting, the job offer that never gets sent, the parent who skips groceries because they don't know if benefits will land. That's how growth dies, not in a crash, but in a slow freeze. So the trade-off here isn't between a little pain now and business as usual later. The real choice is between preserving economic capacity or watching it degrade day by day until the recovery itself starts from a lower rung entirely. So, when I step back, what I see is a systemic wound, not a momentary glitch, but a widening fracture. A government unable to function is no longer a political inconvenience, it becomes an economic hazard. And that hazard right now is falling hardest on people who already carry the weight of uncertainty. So no, I don't necessarily think that this is just a temporary blip. The damage is structural and it's getting harder to reverse with every passing day that we go through this. Because when governments break down, the economy doesn't just pause and then restart. It bleeds trust. It loses rhythm. It forgets how to grow. For the average person, that means fewer services, lower wages, and more stress about tomorrow. For the system itself, it means stagnation, a quieter, slower kind of collapse. If the state is supposed to be the scaffold of daily life and not a stage for political melodrama, Then when that scaffold weakens, it's the people beneath it who will fall. That's why I wrote Awake, because navigating a moment like this, where slow-moving crisis and long-term risks are hiding behind short-term headlines, requires clear critical thinking, strategic thinking, and that starts with seeing the deeper structure beneath the noise. If you've been meaning to pick it up, now is the time. The 10% launch discount ends in just a few days, and it's the best way to support the work that I do here as well, and equip yourself for the kind of world that we're all heading into. You'll find the link to Awake in the launch video just below. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to explore this further, check out these videos that I've linked here as the natural next step. Until next time, stay awake.